I'm Lori Sweet. I was born in Kingston. I come from a really small family. I have one brother, I have an adult son and daughter. I have two stepsons, a 10-year-old step granddaughter, a 20-month-old granddaughter, and another grandbaby on the way. And of course, most of you know my husband, Silvio Roy. I have a diploma in early childhood education that I got right here in Kingston at St. Lawrence College, and a Bachelor of Applied Arts from Ryerson, which is now, I guess, called Toronto University. That's a new one. And Bachelor of Education from Queen's University. Now, as far back as I can remember, I wanted to be a teacher. And I remember taking my little table and chairs and my little blackboard and my brother, who was 4 years younger than me, and I was teaching him. He was sitting there, little legs dangling. Couldn't even talk, but he sat there so I could teach him. When I graduated from Queen's, the local school board here wasn't hiring any teachers. So I decided that I didn't want to leave Kingston. So what I did is I volunteered in the classroom of the last teacher that I'd done my practice teaching with. She wasn't feeling well the first day of school. She left at noon, and I stayed for 3 months. I then moved over to Beach Road to their alternative program for, it was actually high school students that just weren't doing well within the high school, but legally needed to be educated. And then I did a maternity leave, a grade 1 at Welburn Public School. I was lucky enough the following school year to be one of the very few teachers hired full-time. So I spent 30 years teaching with what was Frontenac, then became Limestone District School Board. And I taught kindergarten through grade 8. I spent my very first few years at Storrington Public School. And teaching at a rural school provided some really unique experiences. I'll share 2 of them. The first one, I managed to get to school one day. I was the first teacher in the building along with a custodian, and I was in my classroom. I could feel somebody watching me, and I looked up, and there were 2 dairy cows looking in my classroom window. The custodian and I spent the next 30 minutes rounding up the cows to get them off the main road, which was a very busy road, while we waited for the farmer to come and get them. Another time, I had a student teacher teaching kindergarten. She had all the kindergarten kids, and in the circle that they put on the, we sit on the floor. And she was talking about where food comes from. She was really having a hard time getting them to say the word milk. She just wasn't going about it correctly. So finally she said, what you put in your coffee. And one of the little kids said, Kahlua? My last 13 years were at James R. Henderson Public School, where Paul's children go. And I was teaching English, science, and health to French immersion kids. Now, when you teach those subjects, those are their only subjects in English. The rest of the time, they must do everything in French. Well, I wanted to learn to speak French, so I asked them to practice. That was an absolute no-go. Mrs. Sweet, this is the only time we're allowed to speak English. Science was my favorite subject to teach. When I would teach properties of air to the grade 6s, Sylvia would come as a guest speaker and talk about the connection between air and flight. I would take the students then to the airport. We would go up in the tower, we'd go into the terminal, and then Sylvia and a friend would pull out the small airplanes and allow each of the students to have an opportunity to sit in the airplanes. My last 2 years were my absolute favorites. During those years, my students were involved in science experiments with the Canadian Space Agency and Commander Chris Hadfield. 2 of the big experiments. Number 1, we helped measure the radiation in our everyday world on Earth, while they were doing that on the International Space Station. Then all the data was collected. The other experiment involved tomato seeds. There were tomato seeds on the International Space Station. When Commander Hadfield finished his time there, he brought them back, and my class was given some of them to plant and to track their growth. It was a really unique experience for my students because they knew that they were actually touching things that had been in space, something very few people in the world had an opportunity to do. The culmination of these projects was my class being selected among very few classes across Canada to, we interacted with Commander Hatfield via Zoom. We were able to ask questions and of course, hear some really inspiring stories. Travel's always figured into my life. When I was young, my parents towed a trailer behind the car. We went across Canada and visited many of the states. As an adult, even while I was teaching, I worked with a travel company here in Kingston. I worked on their itineraries. I worked on mainly being a tour director while I was still teaching. And of course, I did that on weekends, March break, and over the summer. On my own personal trips, I always looked for things to bring back to the classroom. One time, Silvio and I were on a helicopter ride through the Grand Canyon. I couldn't take the camera away from my eye because it was a big camera then, it wasn't the phone, because I was coming back and I was teaching a unit on rocks and minerals for my grade 5s. Another time we were in Paris. We were going up the Eiffel Tower in the elevator, picture, because I was teaching forces on structures. After I retired, I moved into that travel company for about 3 years, working on those itineraries for the company and for schools. During that time, Silvio and I got talking about our retirement plans down the road. We both love to travel and write. So we thought if there's some way we could combine that, that would be a great outlet. We went to New Orleans and did a travel writing course. We were absolutely hooked. Within 3 weeks, we had our first article published. We were moving along at a good pace, and then COVID happened. Travel, of course, was no longer an option, or at least at that point. So Silvio and I had been discussing our next steps and how we could help out others. We were actually sitting, having dinner, watching the news, and we saw a Kingston Rotary Club commercial about the centennial year coming up, and lo and behold, there was Carol Cartier and our partner Pete Burrell in some of the photos. Well, Carol and I had taught together for several years. I'd also followed her on Facebook, and I knew she not only traveled a lot, but was involved in projects both local and international that really made an impact on others. I reached out to Carol. We set up a Zoom meeting to learn more about Rotary, and Silvio and I joined almost immediately. If we were able to do some good, whether it was locally or internationally, we knew it would be a good fit. We still travel quite a bit and continue to document and publish our travel adventures. We also write about food and wine as well, some of the good things in life. So what's next? Well, next week, Silvio and I are taking Berenice, our international student, and a friend to Niagara Falls for the day. We're going to fly up for the day. She can't go back to France without experiencing Niagara Falls. Then our next big adventure in June is a 5-day, 4-province expedition with 15 airplanes. We'll be raising money and awareness for Hope Air on a mission called Give Hope Wings. We hope that you will follow along with our adventures. Thanks.